Hey, it's Matt from Hidden Machine here. Today's video covers some very taboo and extreme topics. It's about a game called No Mercy, which is a very extreme game that has caused a lot of controversy and has had a huge impact on indie gaming and game preservation. So I think it's an important topic to cover, but I want to give a little warning here that it is very taboo and pretty extreme. That said, the video itself isn't horny and it's not, glorifying anything like that. So check it out with caution, and obviously this video will not be monetized. If you like what we do and want to support the channel, check out the Patreon. Thanks to everyone who does support us, and let's get into this talk. Earlier this month, itch.io de-indexed all adult NSFW content on their site, making it unavailable to reach through searching or browsing. This was the direct result of a campaign led by an Australian activist group called Collective Shout, who are described as a force against the pornification of culture. Collective Shout has campaigned against other games, but this most recent activity is in response to a game called No Mercy, which was released in March of this year. By the middle of April, the game had been banned in 3 countries. The game was removed from itch.io, and the developer and publisher of the game voluntarily removed it from Steam. No Mercy is a pornographic visual novel about incest and sexual blackmail, and the game contains plenty of depictions of both consensual and non-consensual sexual acts. It's a deeply misogynistic power fantasy, which is exactly the type of content that Collective Shout would like to see erased from culture. The group made direct pleas to Valve concerning No Mercy, but when Valve didn't respond, the group went to the payment processors who Valve works with. These are companies like PayPal, MasterCard, Visa, and others. Making these sorts of appeals to payment processors has led to many kinds of pornography being banned on platforms like OnlyFans and other sites that allow users to upload and sell their own adult content. Groups like Collective Shout put pressure on the payment processors, and in turn, the payment processors put pressure on platforms like Steam by threatening to stop processing their payments. This has led to both Steam and itch.io removing many games from their platforms. According to a statement from Itch, the situation escalated so rapidly that de-indexing all adult games without warning was the only way they could keep the site running. That action has led to a massive backlash, with many gamers calling the move cowardly and others calling for a permanent boycott of the platform. There is a lot more to this story, but before we go too much deeper, I want to talk more about No Mercy. Hearing that this game was so vile that it had to be banned in multiple countries, I became curious to know what it was actually like, so I tracked down a copy and played through it, so you don't have to. I heard a lot of rumors about the game, including one that claimed there was a scene that allowed you to impregnate a woman and then murder both her and the baby.
After an assault on your mother, where she later gets pregnant, the game features a scene where you kill both her and the newborn child.
While I haven't combed through the entirety of the game files, I definitely didn't encounter anything like that, and it wouldn't really make sense in the timeline of the story. Still, the game is undoubtedly full of scenarios that many people would find morally reprehensible, even in a work of fiction. I'll go over the events of the game in as much detail as I can without things becoming salacious. The game opens up by asking you your name. I decided to roleplay as Larry David, which is something I do in any game that allows me to define or create my own character. Next, you're asked to define the relationship between you and your father's wife. There's a prompt here suggesting husband's son or just son. You can put any word you want in here, it's just a variable for the game to call on while displaying dialogue. However, if you do decide to type in the word son, the story in the game becomes that much more taboo. Next, the game asks you to define the role of the woman in the game, once again offering suggestions like stepmother or mother. You then name this woman, and I chose to call her Sassy. The game then plays out over 7 chapters and a prologue. The core of the story revolves around Larry David discovering that Sassy has been cheating on her husband. Larry walks in on the act and snaps a pic, and then uses that picture as blackmail against Sassy. Larry David, or whatever you decide to call your character, is a total psychopath. He's a college student, and Sassy, or whatever you decide to call her, is a 37-year-old professor at the university that Larry attends. The morning after he caught Sassy cheating, Larry is at school, trying to decide his next move. He then sticks out his foot and trips a fellow student named Tommy. Tommy owes Larry money for some weed that he sold to him. This is where you get your first real taste of the gameplay in No Mercy. You can choose several actions here. Actions that you choose will directly affect your relationships with various characters in the game, allowing for different scenarios to play out or for different choices to become available to you. I decided to kick Tommy in the gut and extract a few more dollars from him. Shortly after, Tommy's mother arrives at the school and asks to speak with you privately. She wants you to stop selling drugs to Tommy and offers to pay you off. However, Larry isn't interested in money and instead pressures her into blowing him, using the promise of Tommy's safety as leverage. During this encounter, you're shown various dialogue options, with the more extreme and demeaning options offering you extra points. You can also choose to choke Tommy's mother during this encounter, but not to death. It's just a light choking. After concluding your meeting with Tommy's mother, you head off to class, which just so happens to be taught by Sassy. For some reason, the lights don't work, and it's starting to get dark outside, so Sassy takes attendance and then dismisses the students. Larry decides to stay behind. He locks the doors and approaches Sassy. The two discuss what had transpired the night before, and Larry makes it clear that he intends to manipulate and blackmail Sassy. He forces her to touch him, and the scene ends with Larry getting headbutted and falling to the ground. The next episode sees Larry walking around downtown, where he encounters Sheila. Sheila is an environmentalist who is trying to raise funds to protect the local beaver population. Larry proposes a special offer to the desperate activist, and the two engage in some private business in a nearby alleyway. As with almost every encounter in this game, Larry once again uses coercion, intimidation, and force to get what he wants. After returning home, Larry and Sassy have another encounter, and this time things progress even further, with the act in question reaching a sticky conclusion. The next morning, Larry's father, John, unexpectedly comes home. John is a trucker who is in the middle of an extended trip, but was able to arrange a one-day visit with his family. He takes Larry out to lunch, where he confides in Larry that he believes Sassy is cheating on him. John has decided to freeze the joint bank account that he shares with Sassy, under the guise of it being some sort of issue with the bank. He assumes that Sassy will reach out to another man for help, and that this man could be the person who she is cheating on him with. He gives Larry some extra cash to cover food and bills while the account is locked, and asks Larry to keep a close eye on Sassy. Larry sees this as an opportunity to further manipulate Sassy, since he'll be the only one in the house with any money. Meanwhile, Sassy is back at their home, taking a shower and contemplating her situation. Once she finishes, she heads to her bedroom to change. Unbeknownst to her, John and Larry have come back home, and Larry is hiding behind the bedroom door, waiting to take advantage of her. He makes a move, and she pushes him off, causing a commotion that alerts John. He comes into the room to see Larry on the floor and Sassy, startled and naked. Somehow he laughs this off, and the scene ends. Later that night, the family is watching television together. Larry seethes with jealousy at the sight of his father cuddling with Sassy. Eventually, Sassy falls asleep on the couch and John heads to bed, but not before proclaiming that he'll be taking some sleeping pills to help him fall asleep very quickly. 1 minute and 13 seconds later, Larry finds another opportunity to take advantage of Sassy. The next morning, John sees Larry and Sassy both asleep on the couch. He thinks nothing of it as he heads back to work. Once the two are alone in the house again, Larry initiates another encounter with Sassy. Later that day, Sassy's sister comes over. I named her the President, but her default name is Eve. Eve is having trouble with her computer and asks Sassy to send Larry over to help her. Larry stops by Eve's house and immediately begins creeping on her. She brushes this off and pours herself a glass of wine. Her love of white wine is one of her defining characteristics. Larry then sees a photograph on a table. The photo was taken 20 years prior and shows a young Eve and Sassy out on the night of their high school prom, standing with a mysterious man named Lopez. Eve describes Lopez as a shady business guy and the only friend that Sassy had back in high school. After examining the photo, Larry heads into the bedroom and begins troubleshooting the computer. After briefly considering installing a camera on the computer to spy on Eve, he goes into her browser history and finds that Eve has a very specific fetish. She likes to watch videos where a nephew blackmails and sexually dominates his aunt. Larry sees that he's the perfect candidate to fulfill her fantasies, and after fixing up the computer, he makes a move on Eve. She rejects him and sends him home, but once he's gone, she admits to herself that the encounter excited her, and she immediately begins to entertain herself. Sometime later, Larry is waiting for a bus back home and has an hour to kill. He decides to go to a nearby lake and jack off. Still thinking about the photo he saw earlier, he decides to see if he can find any other pictures of Sassy from around that time. By typing in 2005 college party Sassy, he somehow finds a photo of Sassy taken on the same night as the prom. Through a deductive minigame, we learn that the photo was taken by Lopez, suggesting to Larry that there was some kind of romantic relationship between Sassy and Lopez. Later, Larry returns home and has another encounter with Sassy, and the two further discuss their situation. Sassy wants to distance herself from Larry, but reluctantly goes along with his advances. As you talk to Sassy, you'll be able to spec into either a domination path or a love path, which will affect the events of the game's ending. I chose the love path, mostly because I was already feeling disturbed by the game's content, and I didn't necessarily want to see things become even more sadistic. Later that night, Larry receives a text from Eve, asking to meet up the next day so that they can talk about what happened after he fixed her computer. Despite being coy and claiming to not actually want to engage in anything sexual with Larry, we are then shown a scene that leaves no question as to what Eve's actual desires are, as she once again entertains herself at the thought of being with Larry. Meanwhile, somewhere outside of the city, John is fueling up his truck. Marco, a fellow trucker, appears from the shadows and asks John if he would like to join the rest of the trucking crew at a local brothel. Staying true to his wife, John declines the offer. We then go back to Larry and Sassy, who have yet another encounter. Larry then heads out to a local convenience store to pick up some drugs that he plans to sell. Suddenly, a woman calls out that a thief had stolen her purse. I chose to pursue the thief and retrieve the purse, but then I also chose to steal the money in the purse for myself. With the earnings, I was able to secure 2 bottles of wine, some lingerie, and a blindfold. Larry then heads over to chat with Eve, who answers the door wearing a towel.
You'll have to speak up, I'm wearing a towel.
Larry presents the bottle of white wine, which is Eve's favorite, and the two sit down to talk. Larry pulls up the photo of Sassy that he found online, and asks Eve what she knows about Sassy's relationship to Lopez. Eve says that after the night of the prom, Sassy and Lopez had some kind of falling out, and that afterward, they never heard from Lopez again. Larry continues to ply Eve with wine, commenting on how drunk she appears. Obviously, the situation advances, and the two spend the night together. Next, Larry heads over to Tommy's apartment to collect the rest of the money that Tommy owes him for the weed. He winds up breaking into the apartment and finds Tommy's mother on the phone. Larry initiates another encounter with her, using the same intimidation tactics that he employed in their first meeting. As the action ensues, Tommy walks in, and Larry taunts him. Larry then leaves and returns home to have another encounter with Sassy. The next morning, Eve stops by, and she and Larry engage in a quick encounter while Sassy is in the next room. We then see a scene from Tommy's house where his mother confronts him about his drug use. She expresses concern over his safety, but Tommy's thoughts are preoccupied, and we get confirmation that he has developed an Oedipus complex. The story then returns to Larry, who decides to visit a retired police officer who lives in his neighborhood, acting under the assumption that if Lopez actually was a shady businessman, as Eve described him to be, then maybe the officer might have some information on him and his possible criminal history. The officer doesn't have anything to offer at the moment, but says he'll get back to Larry eventually. Larry returns home and tells Sassy that he wants to take her out. He rents a nice car for the evening, and the two go clubbing. Larry loosens Sassy up with alcohol, and they hit the dance floor together. Sassy is having fun, but Larry crosses a line, and she decides to go off by herself for a while. Some time passes, and Larry can't find Sassy. He hears a commotion in the bathroom and finds a barely conscious Sassy being cornered by a stranger. Larry fights him off, and they head back out to the car together, where they have yet another encounter, after which Sassy falls asleep, and Larry drives them back home. The next morning, we see John sleeping alone in his truck. He's approached by a prostitute, but he rejects her advances. Meanwhile, Sassy and Larry discussed what had happened the night before. Throughout the game, Sassy expresses that she is uncomfortable with what has been happening between them, but at the same time, she is often being compelled by her own emotions and hormones, with Larry's constant negging furthering her confusion. She can't deny that she's grown closer to Larry, but she still feels used and ashamed. Larry is unfazed by this, and heads downtown to run some errands. He gets a text back from the former police officer, who says that Lopez apparently disappeared without a trace. There is barely any record of Lopez anywhere, and the officer wasn't even able to find Lopez's full name, which he says has never happened in his entire 30-year career in law enforcement. Larry then wanders aimlessly until he notices Tommy's mother through a store window. He walks inside, intimidates her once again, also intimidates her further in front of her husband, and eventually brings her to a dressing room for another encounter. Now, depending on your previous choices, the scene can include an appearance from Tommy, doubling down on the game's incestuous themes. Larry then heads to a Japanese-style bathhouse where he's scheduled to meet with Eve. On the way there, he again sees Sheila, the beaver activist from earlier in the game. She is again hard up for donations, and Larry offers to give her $100 in exchange for accompanying him to the bathhouse. When they arrive, Eve is excited to see Larry and doesn't seem to mind that he brought along a second woman. The scene progresses exactly how you'd expect it to. Larry heads home to find that Sassy had prepared a dinner for them to share, and while he does want to eat, he isn't interested in eating food. What happens next is an extended sex scene that checks nearly every box, and culminates in John coming home and walking in on Sassy and Larry. We then go back 20 years into the past, where young Sassy and Lopez are standing beside a lake. The same lake where Larry went to jerk off earlier in the story. But at this point in time, Sassy and John were dating. But Sassy had cheated on John with Lopez. At the lake, Sassy was trying to express her regret to Lopez, but the conversation was cut short when John showed up. Lopez and John began arguing, which led to John stabbing Lopez in the stomach, killing him, and throwing his body into the lake. Fast forward 20 years, and that same murderous rage that caused John to murder Lopez has been awakened by the sight of Larry and Sassy doing the nasty. John shoves Larry, who cracks his head open on a nightstand. Blood begins to pool on the floor, and the scene ends with Sassy calling an ambulance. We then get a Fallout-style recap of our actions and their consequences before viewing one final scene. In my playthrough, John and Sassy divorce. John moves away, and Sassy sells their house. With the earnings, she gets an apartment in another city that she and Larry move into together. They also take an exotic vacation. The game ends by saying that Sassy seems happy, or at least Larry chooses to believe that she is. I didn't bother to play through to see any other endings, but from what I've read, there's an ending where Larry dies, and another where he time travels 20 years into the past, and somehow quantum leaps into the body of Lopez so that he can be with young Sassy. I wouldn't say that I enjoyed playing through No Mercy. I'm not into animated pornography, and I'm also not a fan of the sort of family stuff that is at the core of the game. I played through it purely because I had to know for myself what sparked all of this panic over adult games being sold on Steam and itch. Collective Shout called the game a rape simulator, which I can't entirely agree with. The game does include depictions of rape, but they occur in the context of a larger story, and there are also plenty of other things going on in the game. I've seen games on Steam that I definitely would call rape simulators. These are games that don't have any real plot or other mechanics outside of their explicit and often violent sexual content. That isn't to say that I don't find No Mercy to be problematic, but if I had to make an analogy, I would say that No Mercy is more akin to something like Last House on the Left, as opposed to something like the August Underground films. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, tread lightly while Googling those movies. Now, I've watched plenty of films that delve into similar taboos as No Mercy, and these films often feature characters who are as ruthless and demented as the protagonist of No Mercy. There are tons of exploitation movies that are widely appreciated as controversial classics, even though many of them are low budget, poorly acted, poorly directed, and largely lacking in anything other than shock value. Many writers and directors who have worked on such films have gone on to find mainstream success. The same can be said for authors like Bret Easton Ellis or even Stephen King, who has written what I personally found to be unnecessarily graphic depictions of sexual violence against children. In general, there can be a lot of cognitive dissonance or compartmentalizing that goes on when it comes to holding others accountable for things that we might personally find objectionable. For example, I know plenty of people who happen to find Joe Rogan to be a dangerous source of harmful misinformation. But at the same time, these same folks are super stoked on the upcoming Deftones album, despite the fact that the co-founder and lead guitarist of the band has been outspoken about being a flat earther and anti-vaxxer. I've caught myself doing this, being disgusted by something when one person does it, but basically turning a blind eye when someone else does or has done the same thing. And honestly, I think that's unavoidable, which is why I really try to look deeply at the root of something before I pass judgment on it. Personally, I found No Mercy to be in very poor taste, but at the same time, one of my favorite films is Bad Lieutenant, which also contains plenty of depictions of sexual intimidation and assault. When it comes to No Mercy, what is it that I have a problem with? And is that problem serious enough for me to endorse the game, and other games like it, being entirely banned from online storefronts? Do I find the content in a game like this to be so harmful that I believe society would be safer without it? Personally, no, I don't think so, but it does force me to confront the issue at hand, which is that the response to No Mercy has led to many other games being delisted or removed. And some of these games don't include any content even remotely similar to what is in No Mercy. These sweeping actions are affecting all sorts of creators. At its core, No Mercy is a game about violence toward women as a sexual fantasy. And I can totally understand Steam or itch not wanting to platform games that feature the glorification of rape and incest as their core themes. If we're going to start banning certain types of content on these digital storefronts, I think it would be crucial to clearly define what isn't allowed, and to explain why it isn't allowed. However, when it comes to these issues with the payment processors, that just isn't happening. If you look at the onboarding documents that Steam provides to people who are looking to sell games on that platform, there is a list of 15 things that you shouldn't publish on Steam. These include hate speech, which is defined as speech that promotes hatred, violence, or discrimination against groups of people based on ethnicity, religion, gender, age, disability, or sexual orientation. You also cannot publish nude or sexually explicit images of real people. You can't publish adult content that isn't properly labeled and age-gated. You can't publish libelous or defamatory statements, content that is illegal, content that is patently offensive or intended to shock or disgust viewers, or content that exploits children in any way. There are also rules about not publishing viruses or applications built on blockchain technology, and a few other rules that are all pretty well defined and, in my opinion, are totally reasonable. But it's rule number 15 that I take issue with. This rule was recently added to this document, and it forbids you from publishing, quote, content that may violate the rules and standards set forth by Steam's payment processors and related card networks and banks, or internet network providers. In particular, certain kinds of adult-only content. Now, that's not very clear. A paper was published in November of last year titled The Definitional Creep: Payment Processing and the Moral Ordering of Sexual Content. The abstract of the paper offers this summary. Discussions of online content moderation often focus on the platform. However, credit card networks and payment processors determine what content can be monetized and therefore placed on adult platforms. Through fieldwork and interviews among adult industry stakeholders and a survey of adult content creators, this paper demonstrates how these financial actors impose a moral ordering of sexuality that prioritizes credit card brand reputation and optics over the autonomy and integrity of sexual subjects. Visa and MasterCard, via payment processors, suppresses kink content in the name of ensuring consent and safety. This process inappropriately broadens the definition of harmful sexual content, what we call definitional creep, such that private financial entities can effectively create de facto global obscenity law that suits corporate rather than collective interests. While this paper focuses on the adult entertainment industry outside of the realm of gaming, it is still totally relevant to the situation on Steam and itch. I'd like to quote a paragraph from this paper that explains exactly why itch had to de-index all of its adult content. Neither Visa nor MasterCard list specific sexual acts or kinks in their guidelines. Payment processors must interpret their broad definitions, which conflate illegal and brand-damaging content and prohibit marketing the depiction of non-consent. Processors tend to do so conservatively to appease their relationship with the credit card networks, and subsequently pass their terms and conditions down for platforms to comply with. In this way, compliance can become a game of broken telephone. Visa and MasterCard's vague rules are interpreted and relayed across multiple layers, from banking regulations to payment processor policy to platform moderation. As a result, prohibited content is defined imprecisely and can fluctuate. While there are trends in the type of content being banned across platforms, every platform has different rules. As a group of platform representatives argued during an industry panel that Franco attended, while there is a baseline of universally prohibited content, each platform allows different forbidden fruits according to their particular interpretation. So there it is. The credit card companies at the top of this chain won't clearly define prohibited content, and so responsibility gets passed down the line, and it results in things like itch de-indexing over 20,000 titles. When it comes to collective shout, I can totally identify with their desire to see a culture that doesn't constantly over-sexualize and objectify women, but it's clear that their tactics are having an impact way beyond what they claim in their mission statement. When these guidelines have no clear boundaries, there's room for all sorts of voices to be silenced and completely pushed out of the culture. There's a very similar situation that can be observed in the film industry. Traditionally, in America, if you want your movie to be widely released in theaters and on home media, you need it to be rated. Ratings are given out by the MPAA. This is an anonymous group of people who can reject your film for whatever reason they want. In 2006, a documentary was released called "This Film Is Not Yet Rated." I think the documentary is a fascinating watch, but it's also a very frustrating one. The MPAA claimed that it only hires people who have children between the ages of 5 and 17. The whole reason we even have ratings on films is to help parents decide if a film is appropriate for their children to view. So the members of the MPAA are supposed to represent an average of parents across the nation. This is the same reason why video games are rated by the ESRB, and why some music has a parental advisory sticker on it. Throughout the documentary, the identities of MPAA board members are revealed. Out of 10 members identified, only 2 had children under the age of 15, and most had children who were in their 20s. Dozens of people from the film industry are interviewed in the documentary, and through their experiences, we learned that the MPAA was much harsher when it came to judging any queer material, and that depictions of rape and violence against women were much more acceptable to the board than any depictions of female sexual pleasure. The board also had the power to essentially block a film from widespread release by giving it an NC-17 rating, since at the time, most theaters and video stores did not show or carry any NC-17 films. This was 20 years ago, but the issue still persists today, and it's a clear example of how this sort of system can be abused or just plain unfair. Ultimately, I don't have a solution here. A bill was introduced back in February called the Fair Access to Banking Act, which would basically force banks and payment networks to only refuse business from someone who was breaking the law, rather than just doing something that they didn't like. At the moment, it's unclear if the bill will go any further. From the research I've done, I predict that Steam and itch will eventually create their own guidelines that are more clearly defined. Because this whole thing revolves around adult content, we can look to the adult entertainment industry for some insights. You might remember that for a brief time, OnlyFans prohibited all adult content. Now that decision was reversed, but the site did implement a new set of clearly defined guidelines for prohibited content. And if you look at the guidelines for similar platforms like Fansly or ManyVids, each site has unique things that they allow that other platforms won't. This goes back to that quote about each platform allowing different forbidden fruits according to their particular interpretation of compliance with the demands of the credit card companies. In response to the situation with itch, many people have suggested just ditching the payment processors in favor of a cryptocurrency system. This is actually very common when it comes to certain types of extreme pornography, but I don't think that it's a viable option outside of very niche interests. Setting up a crypto wallet and converting your dollars is something that I don't think most gamers are willing or even experienced enough to do. Personally, I think I just need to wait and see where things go. I don't like what itch did, but I also understand that the entire site could collapse if they didn't comply. If you're mad at anyone, I think you should be mad at the credit card companies who give these vague directives and intimidate platforms into complying with rules that are never clearly defined. There's also no reason why some other group couldn't come in and start advocating the removal of almost any type of content. I think it's fine if Steam and itch want to prohibit certain things from their platforms, but those things need to be clearly defined and justified. Otherwise, we're leaving gaming open to a very uncertain future.